My philosophy has always been that you, as someone who grew up on the internet, you as a user of the internet, sort of no longer have a choice about whether or not you want to be on the internet. Like if you go on a date, someone's going to look you up before on Instagram. And if you're not on Instagram, that's going to be weird. Like you kind of just, you need to be on these platforms. You need to be on LinkedIn, as cringe as it is, if you want to have like a trad job. Like all of these things feel very true. And so I think if we don't have the ability to exit these systems, we should at least have a voice in them. If we want to get people to the point where they can actually have a voice and this becomes effective, you need to use mechanisms that get people interested and engaged in digital spaces. And the way that we know you can get people interested and engaged in digital spaces is by making them addictive. So I think there's like definitely a dark pattern here that you want to be careful about. But I think we need to start using some of these like more questionable practices on the internet. Actually, I think that we should explore what it might look like to ethically use some patterns that I think we've stayed very far away from as a matter of principle.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lightspeed. Today, we are joined by David Phelps and Chase Chapman. David is the founder of Jokerace, and Chase is the host of a podcast called On the Other Side. It's actually on the Blockworks Network and also a contributor at Metropolis. David and Chase, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Excited to cause chaos.
If you guys heard the beginning before we hit record, you would be very excited about this conversation. This one's going to be a bit different than usual, but I actually think it's not only going to be fun, but it's going to be super insightful. Chase, I'm going to actually copy you on a question that I've heard you ask a lot of your guests. And you say, what are assumptions that you're questioning, or like, should the crypto community be questioning? And I think a really good place to start would be in governance, because you both have some really fun and insightful ideas on this. So maybe Chase, let's start with you. What is something that crypto gets wrong about governance?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting out, we think about governance as this like design space that people give a shit about. And I just think that's not really true for the most part. I think if we want to have like this user-owned and user-controlled internet that seems to be sort of like the guidepost for where we're going, I think we need to be thinking about governance a lot more as a feature than as a product itself. I feel like last bull market, we did a lot of building around governance as like this thing that people are going to want to do. And I think we need to move towards governance as this feature of consumer applications where it's kind of built into these experiences. It's maybe native to consumer sort of like flows and interfaces. And so I've been thinking a lot about that and how to make governance more fun, which I know David has also been thinking about and building around for Jokerace and in general. I know this is something you've been thinking about, David.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like you say the word governance and everyone, just like shoot themselves, unless you're like a hacker or like an arbitrator and you're like, governance is amazing because it's like, I can go in and rug a treasury. Like governance is this awesome thing for me. But unless you're that guy, I mean, governance sucks. And that's why we don't even use the term governance. We use the term contests. And I think like when you switch it to the word contests, you realize like, okay, wait, everything is contest, right? Your yearbook, thing is a contest. Your election for president is a contest. But like even every social media platform is a contest. Like when you're going on Twitter, you're putting a proposal to the world and saying, what do you think of this? And then a bunch of people upvote it with this feature called like, right? And then if they upvote it enough, then it gets more popularity to be seen by more people. And so you are in a contest where you're competing against everyone else's content in order to gain visibility. And that is the game that you're playing, is like you are in this constant contest to try to get votes by saying, I have a proposal, give me votes, right? And so it's like, once you get into that mindset of like, oh, wait, Twitter is governance, right? Like, that's working, okay, maybe that's not working well. It's working pretty shittily, but like, it works effectively, like at least as an addiction to get people like excited and participating in this. And then it's like, okay, there's a lot we have to learn from social media about how to build contests, right? And it's like, it's this interesting thing because it's like, I mean, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is a contest. It is like a bunch of transactions all competing to get inclusion in a block, right? That is a contest too. And so it's like, all the way down, you just see contests everywhere. It's how our society functions, is like, we love to think about the contest between presidents and that fight as well. And it's like, and then you get to the DAO space and it's like, There's no way to submit. You don't get to have your voice heard, right? You only get to vote. You usually vote negatively against things. That makes you look bad, right, as well. And then, you're voting on boring decisions that you are not actually in any position to have an opinion on. And then people are telling you we need more participation because we need more uninformed people making really boring decisions that are going to count against them in terms of their reputation. And it's like, what the hell are you guys thinking? This is a terrible system. Don't do this. That's it.
So it seems like you guys definitely have some hot takes on this. I am curious if you think anybody has gotten it right so far, or even close to right.
Ooh, that's interesting. I mean, to me, the things that come to mind as people who have gotten it right are mostly projects who have built either governance into applications and not even called it governance. I think in a way, there are certainly things about Friend.tech, which I'm sure we'll get into, that are mechanisms that have been built natively into the application that I don't know that I would call it governance, but they're these building blocks that are done in a very subtle way. I think the other application that comes to mind is FWB, where they have the FWB app, and they built in a governance page on the app, basically, where you can look at all of the proposals that are happening. So I think one of the things for me is definitely the mechanic where you actually have these things built natively into applications, as opposed to thinking explicitly about governance as this thing that people need to go do.
Well, my immediate temptation is to shell some of the use cases that people have done on Jokerace. So Li-Fi putting up $400 and being tell us a feature you want us to build. And I think that's governance. A bunch of people submitting options, all prioritizing them, voting on them, seeing what their favorites are, campaigning for it publicly, performing actions to get allow listed, building Onchain reputation, marketing it, etc. Rehash also comes to mind there, just an amazing podcast that is built on users deciding what speakers they want and then getting power when they win onward. But I think the ultra great use case of this was the Mirror Right Race 2 years ago. And the Mirror Right Race, if anyone remembers it, was this weekly recurring contest where people would all vie to try to get a right token, which would allow them to have a publication on Mirror. And the really cool thing about this mechanism was if you won, you not only got a right token, but you got to become a voter as well. And so you got the status position as well. And so what's really cool about the Mirror Right Race is it's actually an election in disguise that's never marketed as an election. It's marketed as a contest to win a publication. But what you're doing is you're electing this council that expands over time of legitimate users deciding who else is legitimate and who else they bring in. And so it is this progressive decentralization, right, where it includes more and more people over time. And I will, without giving too much away, I will just say there's some really cool use cases coming up on Jokerace with some big protocols that are really looking towards that model, because it's a really effective one of almost a status game of getting everyone excited to have the publication, the status, and the votes. But then this really cool final thing that happens when you do that is everyone goes to social media, right? Everyone campaigns every week to be vote for me. Please, they're tagging each other. And so you get tons of traction because it's a recurring case at a set time and place. You can adjust it if anything goes wrong, but you're also building the status game over time. And so I think the Mirror Right Race is still one of those really cool phenomena that was really successful. And I think we just still have a lot to learn from, frankly.
I feel like the other call out on that in terms of almost all of those examples is when things get interesting is when you move beyond governance for governance sake. And you get to the point where you're actually providing value to the people who are participating in governance in some way. You're either making it really easy for them or you're providing some value. Optimally, you're doing a combination of those things. But I think the big delta between what we've seen and where we're going is really that function of how can we make this interesting and fun as a game first, and governance is just sort of the mechanism to do it, rather than being we need to govern this protocol and decentralize it. That is never going to end up in something that is interesting or really all that successful.
I agree with like 99% of that, but the one place I'd push back is like I don't think we should make it easier for people. Like I don't think it makes any sense to make it easier for people for a couple reasons. And one is like if you're doing big decisions about like how do we diversify this treasury, you do not just want any rando participating. You want a high barrier to entry of people who have thought about this, considered it, really like poured their time and energy into understanding the implications of like the decision that they're making, right? But the other one is just like, you know, in terms of a game, nobody wants to play an easy game. Like it is not fun to play a really easy game that is easy to win. You want to play a hard game that is challenging, that like raises your heart rate and that is like gives you anxiety that you don't know if you're going to win or not. Like that is what a fun game is. And so like raising, you know, it's always a challenge if you look at board games, like how hard do they make it? Because the harder you make it, you know, you get less of an audience, but you get a much more passionate audience. This is true across the arts, right? The more experimental you get, the harder it is for people to participate, but the more passionate the people are who actually do it, right? And so there is a balance, I think, you know, in terms of like where you want to go. Do you want to have Candyland or do you want to have like Twilight Struggle, you know, like a 12-hour, like, you know, a World War II game? Like, you know, there's different types of games that people can create, but I think having a challenge generally and making it hard and like, you know, that is what is fun. People are not, we all think we want complacency and none of us actually do. We're all bored by it. Like we want challenges.
So this is where I think we get into an interesting dynamic though, which is that my gut feeling is that we're going to have two types of governance emerge. One is passive and one is active, where passive is, to your point, like Twitter, the like, right? Like TikTok has their own governance of your personalized feed. I think that is a version that needs to be easy, and optimally people don't even realize that they're actually governing something. When I think about like a user-owned internet and what that might be able to look like, I do think there's an opportunity to have like governance on the back end, but these like interesting, very subtle dynamics on the front end that are just kind of like gauging user sentiment and stuff like that. I think on the flip side, you have this more active type of governance, which is what you're talking about, which is definitely like, yeah, you don't want to make it easy, particularly if they're types of decisions that are like consequential and have real impact. And I think for something like that, you don't want to, you know, decide how you allocate a treasury based on the number of bookmarks on a TikTok. Like that seems dumb.
Yeah, David, on that, can you explain really quick what Jokerace is? Because I think it plays into this whole conversation.
Probably should have done that before I started, you know, talking about use cases. Yeah, it's on-chain contest platform, and so you deploy a contest. Anyone can deploy a contest on our site to any EVM chain, and the way it works is you put a prompt out to a community. People can submit responses. People can vote on their favorite responses. And then if you want, you can add a rewards pool as well to fund the winners as well. And so what's cool is like we're tokenless, which means you can actually decide, you can create an allow list for who gets to submit and who gets to vote. And so you can imagine, right, if you did like the traditional governance where, you know, that we've always done, where it's like a core team just puts a proposal to a community and lets them vote on it. Then you have like a very small team putting the submission out and then a whole wider community voting on it. But you can imagine you can also do the reverse, like a hackathon, you have a bunch of people submitting and then just a small jury votes, right? And so we give you like total modularity to be able just to design this however you want, so that you can run hackathons, grants, you know, giveaways, like prediction games, bounties, RFPs, like, etc. Whatever, really any sort of on-chain decision you want to make as a community. Developer DAO we're working with to do a bunch of on-chain hackathons. And so, right, you would actually have all the contributors dropping their project and there are jury votes on them. And you can imagine, like, you know, even if you lose the hackathon, you're getting this on-chain attestation in the form of a vote, right? And so, like, where a lot of this gets really exciting is like the on-chain reputation piece. Like, you can imagine, I never win a contest, but I participated in so many that I've actually gotten more votes than anyone else has combined. And like down the line, when people are deciding they want to do airdrops or they want to, you know, give access to builders, or they just want to dig into data about who their users are, like that on-chain reputation that you've built is really, really valuable to you, even if you didn't win that specific contest, right? So stuff like that. Those are good cases. LivePure, I think, is doing like a logo contest right now to design their logo that you can participate in. CoinDesk is doing one right now to decide who the most influential people are of 2023. So submit to that one. Like, yeah, go shill. That's a great shilling opportunity.
Okay, so Jokerace is about making everything a contest, and you're talking about like one of the secrets to governance is to make it fun, to make it where like people want to play the game. And Chase, you mentioned Friend.tech just a little bit ago, and Friend.tech, it's an app that's on Base. Coinbase's layer 2, and Base had over 136,000 users last week because of Friend.tech. It's essentially like social media network where you can trade shares based on like popular Twitter figures. Chase, how does Friend.tech play into this this making governance fun or implicit in the app itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely playing with dynamics that are a lot more like on-chain assets than it is governance itself. And the way that they designed it definitely makes it hard to build in governance in like this interoperable way because of the smart contracts. But I think what Friend.tech to me represents is a lot more of a broader strokes kind of attempt at making crypto in general fun and interesting. I think something that became very clear to me after playing around with it and seeing the reaction on crypto Twitter is essentially that like, and this sounds shitty, but I do think it's kind of true. We're not building like addictive enough applications. If governance becomes addictive, we win basically. And I think, you know, there's a lot of nuance there in terms of whether or not that's actually what's good for people and all that stuff. But applications are addictive anyway. Like consumer tech is basically how addicted can you get your users. And so we might as well give them power and make those things addictive in the sense that at least you're governing a platform or a, you know, dynamic or whatever it is that you're governing, at least you have power. And so to me, that is much more of what Friend.tech represents above all else.
The problem with governance is we're not making people addicted to power. And
yes.
Yeah, it's like, if there's one thing that it should be so easy to get humans addicted to, it is power. Like the whole history of the world tells us you should be able to get people easily addicted to power. And the fact that we haven't even managed to do that, I mean, that just speaks to like all of crypto's failings to date.
Basically. And I mean, like to add some nuance to it as well. My philosophy has always been that you, as someone who grew up on the internet, you as a user of the internet, sort of no longer, or I guess even as a, you know, person who exists in the world, sort of no longer have a choice about whether or not you want to be on the internet. Like if you go on a date, someone's going to look you up before on Instagram. And if you're not on Instagram, that's going to be weird. Like you kind of just, you need to be on these platforms. You need to be on LinkedIn, as cringe as it is, if you want to have like a trad job. Like all of these things feel very true. And so I think if we don't have the ability to exit these systems, we should at least have a voice in them. If we want to get people to the point where they can actually have a voice and this becomes effective, you need to use mechanisms that get people interested and engaged in digital spaces. And the way that we know you can get people interested and engaged in digital spaces is by making them addictive. So I think there's like definitely a dark pattern here that you want to be careful about. But I think we need to start using some of these like more questionable practices on the internet. Actually, I think that we should explore what it might look like to ethically use some patterns that I think we've stayed very far away from as a matter of principle.
What would be an example?
Like, I think, what would it look like? I mean, I think Friend.tech is actually a great example, which is like you're buying shares in your friends. On the surface, kind of fucked up. Like, really, that's something that like shouldn't feel awesome, but it's super fun. And I've gone back to the app way more than I'd like to admit because it's interesting and I want to check. And there's something fun to that like dynamic. I think we have not done a great job of experimenting with what those use cases outside of speculation might be. And I'm not saying that Friend.tech is going to save the world, nor is it really like a movement towards a user-owned internet. But I think that we need to be more willing to experiment with that stuff. And yeah, I guess that kind of makes me a villain right now of being like, we need to do all the dark things. But I do kind of think that we need to be more open to playing around with like existing patterns on the internet that we know work to get users engaged and excited about apps.
Chase, I think you're getting at something really interesting here, which is like soft power in the 21st century is getting people addicted to you. Like, say whatever you want about Elon. This is something Elon understands really well. Like if you get people addicted to you and you have power, right? And like, that's how social media works is like, and so there's this interesting question, which is like, what happens when you have communities and collectives? Because there's no longer that individual figure for people to get addicted to. And like what Friend.tech does well is like, it brings back the individual figure as a character, right? And it's like, you can oppose this on a lot of ethical lines and be like, oh no, we don't need to go back to great man history of like single people who like reign supreme and like have relative value over each other that we've actually quantified. And like, that's super gross. Like we need to have like a collective movement. But I do think there's something like in the fact that like even collective movements to succeed need to have characters and figures and like relatable like voices that people get really into and are excited by. And you look, you know, that happened, like we saw that happen with Bernie, we saw that happen with Trump in some ways, but it's like all the collective movements that we've had in crypto have not, I don't think have done that job of narrative and storytelling and voice and character that actually gets people really excited. And so Friend.tech is like kind of a shortcut to that, which is like quantify your friends. It's hot or not with money, right? It's just like you're just ranking your friends, except this time with dollar signs, you know, in front of the number.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I guess the other thing to call out here is one of the reasons that I feel comfortable with us experimenting more with these like ethically gray area type of things is because if you build your contracts correctly and you actually are using Web3 Rails in a way that is ethical, like you can build addictive front ends with back ends that support user ownership and user empowerment and all of those kinds of things. So I think like the problem that you run into with Web 2 is when you build really addictive applications that exploit users. I think that's the big difference here in my mind in this ecosystem, which is basically like how can you build addictive experiences that empower users in some ways as opposed to like exploiting them directly, or bring them closer to a collective and help them explore a collective identity in a way that's really interesting and lightly addictive.
Yeah, Chase, I want to join you in your villain era. Can't leave you, you know, alone there.
Thank you.
You know, something I think a lot about with games when we talk about gamification is like good games are safe spaces for chaos and violence. And so like when you play a game that's really enjoyable, you want to kill your friends. You want to destroy them. You want them, you want to beat them, right? Like often in like, you know, depending on the video game, it could be like a really violent way too, right? And it's like, these are like, you know, safe spaces for us to enact a lot of our id in some ways. And it's like, the irony of all this is like that action is what brings us together. As long as it's within a safe space where we know it's a game and we know there's a framework for it, at the end of that game, we're closer to each other. Like we have bonded with each other through that act, right? And so I think it's like, there's a lot to be said where it's like, can we embrace these kind of like id-like chaotic behaviors in a safe space that overall then actually brings us together and creates more of a collective unity, right? The way that like a good board game will do. And I think it's like, we are instead trying to live where the games we play are following our own ideals of collective, you know, like, joint support, and it's not really that fun. It's more fun when you're competing. It's more fun when there's a challenge. It's more fun when you want to beat your friends and you're standing up against each other, right? And so it's like I think there is a lot to be said for creating those kinds of dynamics. It gets a little scary to me when you bring in money. Like once you're financializing that, that's maybe an element that I'm not just so sure personally that's a safe space anymore. But yeah, I'm otherwise happy to go full villain with you, Chase.
Yeah, I think the money thing is a very good call out. I mean, like that is the interesting thing about money in general, which your piece that you published a while ago, I think demonstrates really well, which is that like money makes everything become real for people. And so it no longer, you know, we can go and play Catan and that's all fine until the resources that I gather in Catan could be taken to Coinbase and traded for real money and I can go buy my own house. And that certainly changes the dynamics, which is why I think also like one of the most important things that we can be doing in terms of governance and consumer crypto is trying to experiment with what does it look like to not just play speculation games, and can we use this technology for consumer apps that are not solely based on the financialization of your friends, which is definitely a big question mark.
I'm actually collateralizing my sheep and right now and using that to buy a bunch of friends. So it's
perfect.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Everyone, we'll get back to the show in a minute, but I want to let you know that we got our Permissionless conference coming up. This is our conference with Bankless. That's the biggest and best conference in DeFi. It's going to be in Austin, Texas this year. Yep, I know you love it. They got tacos, barbecue, Barton Springs. Got it all. September 11th through the 13th. If you've been in crypto for a while, you know that the bear market conferences are the best conferences because those are the ones where all the alphas had. The people that are still in crypto all really want to be there. It's going to be great for building a network, for learning a lot. And look, we've got a phenomenal lineup of speakers that include people like Hasu, Stani, Christine Moy, and Kyle Samani. talking about ZK Tech, rollups, account abstraction, MEV, app chains, and more. Look, I'm damn excited. Because you're a listener of Lightspeed, you're going to get a special discount. Type in discount code Lightspeed30 and you'll get 30% off your ticket. That's right. Just type in Lightspeed30 when buying a permissionless ticket and get 30% off. Click the link at the bottom of this episode and go get it now because prices are going up every 2 weeks. All right, back to the show.
So, I mean, you guys just kind of pointed out a bunch of things that we should be doing, that we could be doing, that you think might make more sense. I guess I'm curious, in an industry where, I don't know, I don't want to say the rules are blurry, but I mean, they are blurry.
Yeah, they're pretty blurry.
Why haven't we gotten this right? Like, what is it the hyper financialization aspect that slowed us down? Like, it seems like it would be an obvious fit, but it hasn't worked so far. Why not?
Dude, building consumer apps in crypto is hard, man. It's like it's really challenging. Like, you know, it's like a short long game. It's like long term on-chain reputation, on-chain data totally beats any sort of Web2 silo system. Like, your ability to have an interoperable identity that will win you access and rewards and opportunities, and that you can control and attest to, like, that is a game changer for advertising. That's a game changer for users monetizing. That's a game changer for like job opportunities. Like, you know, it wins. But the problem is there's still so much less data in Web3, especially because all the data to date has basically been financial and there's been no social data developed, compared to even just APIs you can pull from Web2 platforms. And so like that transition is really hard, and it's really hard to make that long-term case for data when Web2 data is currently better than Web3 data. And so I think, like, without that, you know, then you're stuck with, well, the US sucks. Like, you have to have these like terrible wallets. You have to pay gas fees for everything. You have to like connect to a chain, right? And you have all these challenges just on the UX side. And the other thing is, like, until the past year, it wasn't financially doable. Like, you couldn't pay to do any of this stuff, you know? Like, even now, like on Jokerace, if you set up a contest on mainnet Ethereum, which we let you do, it's $200 to deploy it. And it's like $40 to submit, right? Versus like on the rollups, it's like 2 cents to submit, you know? And so it's like, even now when we say, oh, there's gas, people are like, oh, I don't know if anyone's gonna be able to afford that. And it's like, well, no, it's 2 cents. It's not $20, you know? Things have changed. But it's still a totally new paradigm to actually, you know, work within a system that is affordable, never mind easy to use.
Chase, I'm curious to see what you think as well, because you have a tweet out there I thought was funny, and you said that crypto conferences have better product market fit than any crypto product out there. And you said one of the reasons, which I tend to agree with, and you said one of the reasons for that is also because our focus on like pure decentralization. Do you really think that's what's holding us back, or what is it?
I think a lot of this is kind of like a combination of two things. One is a death by 1,000 cuts, which is what David, I think, is getting at in a lot of ways, where it's like, it's expensive. Onboarding people onto a wallet is a pain in the ass. You need to decide if you want to custody their keys or if you want your users to custody their keys. Like, there are all of these questions that I think up until recently have been just huge pains in the ass. I think we're finally getting to a point where, and again, I think Friend.tech is an interesting example of this, just because it's a recent thing where it's like, it's not an application, so it doesn't have to go through Apple. It's using Base, so the fees are really low. Like, all of these specific things, I think, enable this potentially, like, I'm not going to say Cambrian explosion of consumer applications, but I do think that we're going to see a lot more. I think what that unlocks, which is the other piece that I think we've been missing, is the ability to just experiment and see what works. Like, in the traditional consumer tech world, the whole name of the game is just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what works and seeing how users engage with it. That's really hard to do when you're dealing with all of these random things that are just like going to cause friction, including things like gas, but also onboarding onto a wallet. And so my hope is that as we start to fix those like holes in the boat, we could basically start to actually do a bunch of experiments and just see what works. And the other thing I'll call out is, like, up until now, it never made sense for users to spend a bunch of time or money setting up a wallet or paying gas unless they had a significant confidence in the ROI on that time and money, meaning that speculative games have always been the thing that made sense to invest user time and money into. And so my hope is that the other side of this is not just experimenting on the project side with like applications, but also that as we reduce the barriers to entry there, we start to see new types of use cases that are not only centered around speculation.
One other thing that, point that's worth making here too is technology comes in waves, right? And you look at what are the major apps that have been developed in the past 10 years, it's really TikTok and maybe ChatGPT, and that's it. Like every major app that we know that's out there was basically built like over 10 years ago. And so I actually think that's a reason to be optimistic that there's going to be a whole new wave of kind of crypto apps that are enabled. Like I think this stuff comes in cycles. And I'm working on a piece right now on ChatGPT and why I think it's kind of a game changer for what apps look like as well, including the fact that it's web-based, as are, the big apps that have now launched on crypto, Beam and Friend.tech as well. And so I do think we're looking at paradigm shifts right now that are going to be huge. I think we're at the very beginning of a new wave just of apps generally, as technology is shifting. But yeah, consumer preferences are pretty entrenched, and it's like, you have Be Real and Clubhouse come along every 2 years and people get excited for 4 months and then they turn out to be novelties, right? Like the ability of anyone to develop a compelling app has been really, really limited in the past 10 years.
Yeah, it sounds like identity would be a big part of this. Because you're talking about you had like the next bull cycle. You have like 3 things that need to happen. One of them is that maybe not the next bull cycle, but like a huge bull cycle is to actually have more data on chain, like you're talking about for advertisers. And Chase, you had something interesting when you were talking about wallets are not payment apps, but they're identity apps. Yeah. How do you guys think about on-chain identity? Do you think that's something that needs to be decentralized? Do you think it's fine if like Coinbase comes out with something, and how that can enable new products? Like, is that something that's holding us back?
I mean, I think it's a crucial unlock. Like, let's take a contest. Like, let's say you do a contest that's like, what was your favorite, song you listened to this week? And community comes together and they all vote on what their favorite song was that they listened to this week, right? You have some sort of AI bot. You could actually like figure out what users' preferences are overall, map to their wallet address that then enables all sorts of targeting, right, et cetera. Maybe give them, new offers and opportunities. But like, forget that. Like, say, you're using data that has no idea what the actual content of this contest was. You can still look and see, okay, people tend to vote on the same things over and over every week, right? And so now you have a social graph that these people's tastes are very aligned. Maybe they should know each other. Maybe they should date each other, Like that basis for like a social app is just so powerful once you have those kinds of tastes exposed. You have the fact that it's like whatever's getting voted on, this person wins every week. They have really popular tastes. They really understand the zeitgeist. Like they are popular within this community, and like what they say is very important to listen to, right? You have that data because every vote is an attestation. You have the whole transaction histories. You take those 2 people that voted on the same thing over and over, each week. It's like you can dig into one of their profiles, see all the NFTs they hold. Now you know a lot about them that might also indicate the preferences of the other user as well. And so then the challenge becomes, okay, well, how do we put this on the user side? Like, how does the user have right to protect this data, monetize it, sell it, expose it when they want to? And that's where you really get into probably ZK tech stuff. But like, it's really exciting to think about all the social graphs that come out of just like one contest, right? And so that's all identity. And it's like, never mind the fact that, oh yeah, this user, we did this marketing campaign of what feature, you want us to build. And this person keeps winning every month. It's like, maybe we should hire them. They're really good. Like they have great ideas. Maybe someone else should hire them. Maybe someone else should do an airdrop to them because they're a valuable builder. Like developing this kind of like qualitative information about how the value you provide to communities is a total unlock from the very rote identity, data analytics that we've had so far, which has just been how much liquidity have you provided. That's the only information we've had. Like all we've been able to determine an identity to date is, are you rich or not? Because we've only had financial use cases. And so like, it's just this incredible flywheel that the more social data you generate, the more you can then feed that back in, right? To be like, okay, now let's develop our next contest, giving extra power or allow list to those people who have provided a lot of value to. And you can start to create these like really incredible flywheels where, you develop power over time in these status games, in these financial games, just in these social games, right? Too. And so it's just trying to get that flywheel to unlock. And once it does, I think that's where we're going to see like the whole kind of ecosystem shift. And I do feel like as much as I am really skeptical, I have a lot of issues with Friend.tech, like it does feel like it's the beginning of something new there.
What are some of those issues that you're skeptical of?
Financializing your friends. Yeah.
Yeah, just the dark patterns.
Yeah. I think again, like our idea that there's a universal metric. First of all, it's not a relative local metric, but a universal metric for reputation and value is really dangerous. And then for that to be a financial value is pretty dark. And it's just it's just popularity is what it comes down to. And so, yeah, like I really believe value needs to be local and relative. Like my value to my closest friends is very different from my value to my enemies, right? And or to the people who don't know who I am. And it's like Web 2 has just trained us over and over again to think that the more followers you have, the more people, the more bigger your numbers are, the more popular you are. And that's actually not true. You look at the most popular people on Twitter, they're not the ones with 100,000 followers. They're the ones with 5,000 followers where all 5,000 of them think that person is a god, right? It's like, look at like Suram from Eigenlayer or something. He doesn't have like hundreds of thousands of followers, but everyone who follows Suram like knows how valuable that guy is, right? It's like playing these quantity games of just like, and then reducing that to money is just so, I don't know. I think it's just so simple-minded, like in as a system of ascribing value. And yeah, I think it's a little dark too.
I think in general that also gets at like this idea of having a single metric for your identity or value or whatever is certainly problematic. And I think the idea that this points towards a more localized and contextualized identity and maybe even set of social spaces makes a ton of sense. I think to me, the thing that I've been thinking about in the identity space is the whole Threads situation where Facebook launched Threads. They also own Instagram. And so your initial social network on Threads was seeded basically through Instagram. The thing that taught me was that I do not want the people who I follow and who follow me on Instagram to engage with me in a text-based app that looks like Twitter. And so I think like your point, David, and that experience both point towards this idea that identity needs to be contextual. And that like who I am on this podcast is not who I am when I'm joking with David about, whatever. And like that matters. And so there's a lot more dick jokes going on when David and I are one-on-one that I'm not going to be making on this podcast. And so like, I think that type of thing really, really matters in the context of how we design these systems, because composability and interoperability of identity across different platforms is kind of a double-edged sword in that way. I don't think that we have fully had experiences yet where that comes to like fruition, because we haven't had as many consumer apps take off, and so much of these things has already been financialized. So it's like the financial lens is the way that we primarily see users in crypto today, and most applications have supported that thus far. Once we get into these use cases that are not so financial, I think that's where things start to become really strange, and people will start to feel a lot more uncomfortable with the fact that their entire financial history is also associated with these like much more intimate parts of their digital lives. And so I think on the identity side, I don't know what that will end up looking like. I totally agree with you, David, in terms of where you see things going with zero knowledge proofs and all that stuff. But yeah, I think contextualizing identity and the ability for users to control what is shared in what contexts and in what applications and with who is something that people say all the time, but that I think from a like purely human-centric perspective also feels like it matters a lot moving forward.
One interesting, while we're on the topic of identity, one interesting thing that crypto enables is kind of identity over owning a certain coin, right? So maybe you are a Bitcoin maximalist, Ethereum, Solana, Cosmos, whatever it might be, which seems to be different from kind of other industries. How do you guys think about kind of the tribalism between these different identities between the different blockchains? Or what do you think we've gotten wrong there? Like how should we, improve upon our tribalism and stop like shitting on each other all the time?
Wait, can I ask your take on it?
My take on it is that I think each chain kind of has like different values that emanate from its history and technical choices. So like Bitcoin, obviously you have Satoshi and the store of value kind of meme. On Ethereum, you kind of have credible neutrality. ultrasound money now, and kind of scaling via rollups, which and being Ethereum aligned as well. And then on Solana, maybe you have something that's a bit more like we care about products and UX and speed. I don't think I think probably what everybody kind of misses is like those things obviously have some overlap, but they're fundamentally different goals to shoot for.
Totally.
Like some of these things, even if they're possible on all three chains, just make much more sense on one of those chains. Right? Like I don't want to hold
Totally.
high value NFTs on something that's not Ethereum. Personally, I'm just gonna prefer that better because I think it's a better settlement layer. On the other hand, if I want fast execution, censorship resistance, and like information propagation, let's say, which is a very niche thing, but let's say I'm a trader and I want that, then I'm probably going to use Solana. And I think the problem arises when people try to, when the financialization aspect kind of occurs, because they think that if chain X gets more stuff built on their chain, then maybe the price of my coin will go down and that'll hurt my identity. But I'm curious what you guys think.
I think it hurts the identity of the people who formed their identity around shilling tokens. So, the loudest voices online are the people who are shilling the loudest for their bags, but those aren't necessarily the majority of bag holders, right? And so I do think there's a question of like, yeah, those people are engaged in a tribal war against each other to try to prove themselves because their entire identity is based on them being right about a token price. But I don't know that that's true for the majority of Solana holders or Ethereum holders, or Bitcoin. Bitcoin, it probably is, but like for Solana and Ethereum, right? Like this idea that your ideology is based on what you bought, like it's just an extension of 20th century consumerism to its kind of like endpoint. I think it's a pretty nihilistic endpoint, which is like you are what you buy, and you're no longer buying a thing; you're just buying money itself, and like the money that you buy is like now your identity. This is very dark and very dumb. But I also don't think it's the majority of holders. I think people buy this because they actually think it's a good investment because they like the technology, not because they believe that, their own identity is based on it. So I think we skew a little bit because the social media voices that win are the ones that are most tribal and the shilliest often as well. But yeah, I know a lot of people who hold both ETH and Solana and like both those projects, as do I personally. I hold both those tokens and I love them both. So maybe I'm projecting. I don't think there's a need to choose. I think it's exactly what you said, Mert. Like these are different use cases and for different purposes. And yeah, one doing really well creates a great opportunity for another to do well. The funniest place you see this is with the rollups, where it's like now all the rollups are going through their own wars with each other. And it's like, honestly, if one of these rollups does super well, its gas prices are going to spike, right? It's going to get really expensive, and it's going to create a great opportunity for everyone to go to another roll up. It's like, all these roll ups, like the more that there are, the cheaper they're making block space and the more opportunity they're creating for each other. And there's a lot of ways that I think like they all actually are working together in creating, like a really great roll up world, but they're not positioning themselves that way. They're positioning themselves in this tribal war because that's what gets attention.
One thing I'd say that's so I have two questions. One is I kind of like the example you just gave, actually, just kind of thinking out loud. If like a roll up got really popular and then the gas fees spiked, that would presumably mean that people might get to another roll up and it's an opportunity for that roll up. I'm going to push back on that a little bit just because I'm not sure I've seen it happen. I'm not sure I've seen it happen that much in crypto. It seems like maybe once there's congestion on a network, they'll kind of just keep wanting to use that network because they kind of feel at home there. And it's maybe not as utilitarian as just going to another chain. At least this is kind of speaking from experience. Like when ETH gas fee spiked, people would still stay on ETH and then would justify it in some way. Like, this just means there's a lot of value going to secure it. As opposed to like, maybe I'll just, and like, of course, some people moved over, but not everybody. So I'm curious on like maybe the extreme edge case there of like, why aren't those people moving over? Or like, in your words, why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, interoperability with rollups is just a lot easier than interoperability between ETH and Solana, right? Like, it's very easy to bridge from one rollup to the other. It's not very easy to bridge from like Ethereum to Solana. So when I say very easy, I mean relative. Bridging still sucks. But I do think like, because you're in the Ethereum ecosystem, there will be that opportunity to stay there. But I honestly, I do think like Ethereum's gas prices spiking was great, like for Solana. Like a lot of the Solana narrative is really based on the inefficiencies of Ethereum, you know, in 2021. And just watching Ethereum play out and being like, there's no way this is going to work. Like this cannot possibly be the future of what blockchains look like. $100 to buy an NFT just for the gas fee alone. Like Solana looked really, really great in that context too. So I do think it actually drove a lot of people there, including me.
Cool. And then the second part of the question, which completely going to be offside, or maybe not that related, which you guys kind of both mentioned the distinction between exit and voice so far in this podcast, which kind of brings me to Balaji and maybe some of his work on network states and communities. How do you guys, because you guys are obviously you thought a lot about, you know, governance, communities, whatnot. How do you guys think about kind of the network state framework?
Chase, this
Such
is
a loaded question. I had a very interesting podcast episode that I'll send you guys to link in the show notes. That's basically like, there are a lot of problems with the network state. The blockchain socialist was who came on the show to talk about it. And he's done a ton of really great writing and podcast episodes on his own podcast about this. I think that I'm very much aligned with his approach on a lot of that stuff, which is basically like the underlying reasoning behind why the network state might be interesting, i.e. like nation states are failing us. These things are not necessarily designed for like the digital spaces that we spend so much of our time in. I agree with, and makes a ton of sense in terms of Balaji's like principles of like why we've gotten to the point where we need something new. I think the actual implementation that the network state suggests, and this is very much what the blockchain socialist argues, is problematic in a ton of different ways and probably doesn't work. And so I think the general sentiment around the need for it is a yes. The details on how we do these things needs a lot of reworking. And I think that the problem that you run into around a lot of that narrative is just like kind of adopting what Balaji says at face value when it comes to how these things actually get built. So I'm very skeptical of, you know, the acquisition of pieces of like physical land of a bunch of people who are rich in internet money deciding to kind of colonize different areas of the world. Also, the sort of one commandment type governance makes very little sense. We know that like polycentric governance is a much better way to run, especially highly complex human systems. So I think there's a lot of revisiting, which is exciting because that's also where this work, you know, happens. That's where I think a lot of the innovation of crypto steps in, is like, how do we rethink governance for a digital space, for a digital and physical space, and how can we do it in a way that just makes a ton more sense from what we have right now. David, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Oh no, do I have to do this?
Yes. Do you have to publicly say that you love Balaji's network state and fully agree
I love
with
it
all
so
of
much.
it?
No, Chase, I think you encapsulated my thoughts pretty perfectly, which is like the theory of digital statehood is really exciting because it enables these things like forking and opt-in systems that you have never had in physical terrains. So choosing and also being able to be part of multiple states at once, right? The fact that you can choose to participate in multiple networks, right? That you can just permissionlessly fork it and build social consensus, and that's not a violent act, you know, of a Confederate like, you know, war. That's just you expressing, you know, a different digital preference and seeing if you can build social consensus around it. Like all of that is really exciting, and it's really exciting because it can't be done in physical states. Like physical states are scarce by definition. They are not abundant. They are not able to endlessly be created and opted into. You are trapped within a specific locality. And so there's this kind of like sleight of hand with a lot of Balaji's writing, where he takes the ideals of a digital network and then applies them to a physical network where actually those ideals I don't think work. And, you know, there's a lot of hand waving about, oh yeah, you just get the UN to, you know, approve your state. And it's like, how easy is that to do, you know, to get the UN to approve your state? And you look at the motivation behind it, and it is a question of like, you know, the point of all of this should be in some ways to get out of tribalism towards being able to be members of multiple tribes, opt into whatever you want, and like let other people opt into their system. But instead, you're getting a system that's very much based on rich people congregating together in order to protect their own interests by colonizing land. And that seems fairly terrifying to me personally. And I know people are excited by this because the return on investment of a state is pretty huge. I do think, like, as much as I lean in many ways, towards anti-regulation, so much innovation historically has been funded by governments over and over again. All of Silicon Valley was funded by governments. Technology in the 20th century is funded. So having strong governments matter. Having governments that we opt into matters. But I think the kind of solutions that they're coming up with to just get a bunch of rich people together and take over a bunch of land, it's, I don't know. I struggle with this one personally.
Yeah, I'm really curious, like, where do you think crypto is going to push things? Because crypto, to me, it has a network effect in almost applications, protocols, et cetera. And when you're talking about nation states, part of that also makes me think of like Cosmos app chains. And you have like this long tail of app chains, and most of them have like no activity on them right now. Now, in the future, they might. But I'm curious if you also think it might just lead to a barbell effect, where it's like almost like the 90-10, where you have a few protocols or Ethereum, different ecosystems that, maybe capture 90% of the value. And you have a lot of others, but like it also pushes out the middle. And I think about this in media as well. So you have someone like Ben Thompson, who is his own business, his own writer, and he's doing great, right? And that's actually been enabled by technology, by like PayPal or Stripe. And that's something that maybe crypto could do as well. But all the like local and regional writers, like they kind of lost their business to Ben Thompson. And then you have like the Wall Street Journal. So I'm just curious, like, do you see that playing out in crypto as well?
Good question. Yeah. Hopefully not. Hopefully, like, digital abundance means that everyone is able to develop their own platform and voice. Like we are already at a state within society where the local writers do not have centralized backers that they can go to. The only option is to write online. And will you face that creator economy problem that like 90% of creators don't have any views, are not getting any audience, not building social consensus? Yes, like I think, Garrett, what you're getting at is that like creating a blockchain is basically the next extension of the creator economy. You're creating a culture and you're trying to get people excited around it, right? And it's like ultimately Solana wins not based on the technology, but based on a bunch of people getting excited by it, right? And sharing it with each other and wanting to use it. It's around culture, right? That you win. And so the same thing is going to be true for all these blockchains that spread out. But I do think there's a way where you look at like 90% of them failing, and like that's a very good thing. That means that like you've enabled tons of experimentation. That you've been able to try every version of it. It's like evolution. Like you want to be able to like maximize for diversity, right? And so like being able to see that anyone was able to try this, and even if they didn't build social consensus, they were able to at least go out and do this thing, and see what happened and get the data from that. Like it's not such a terrible thing. I think it is if everyone's livelihood depends on this, right? If everyone's like, we live in an economic system where the only way to make money is to launch a roll up, then this gets scary. But like as long as like we have some sort of economic protection in place where we can try this stuff as experiments, then it's a really beautiful thing if a lot of stuff fails, because that's how you learn. And that means that we really gave the chance to everyone to experiment too.
I also think over the next few years, we're probably going to start to see, especially as like crypto consumer applications hopefully take off, I think we'll start to see which parts of the stack make sense as like these shared pieces of infrastructure, and which parts of applications are going to just make a lot more sense for teams to build their own infrastructure and own their own infrastructure. And I think that is not really a dynamic that we have a ton of conviction on yet. Like I think we've learned that it seems like Ethereum as a settlement layer makes sense. Awesome. I think like moving forward, there's going to be a lot of experimentation and failure of teams who either want to pull in other tooling but realize it makes more sense to build their own. On the flip side, there will also be teams who build all of their own stuff throughout the entire stack basically and end up realizing like this made no sense. So I think from a sort of centralization of decentralized infrastructure perspective as well, this is something that I think is going to shake out over the next few years.
I think somehow this ties in on what you're doing with Metropolis to me to some degree, because like one thing that's made the internet really accessible is when you have like 1,000 websites, but also things like PayPal made it where all these websites can actually charge for things because people trust being able to put their credit card information in and like buying something. And something that you're doing in Metropolis right now is you have like a tool, I think, to see like permissions on contracts, right? So you can see like if it's a multi-sig, if it's a 3 or 4, et cetera. And it feels like maybe to enable this like wide consumer adoption, also experimentation, you need to have more products like that. And it seems like, is that like a core thesis that you guys hold?
Yeah, I mean, I think like what we've started to see is the emergence of a ton of different types of users. You have people who are like highly technical and are going to go straight to Etherscan to look at contracts. You have people who want like a more accessible interface, but are still checking the chain. And then you have people who don't give a fuck about any of that stuff and just want to buy shares of their friends. And I think we've been doing a lot of thinking on the people in the middle there. I think, you know, the on-chain literacy that we've seen in the space thus far has, I think, actually grown over time. Like with tools like Dune, I think we're seeing a lot more people. I mean, even Blockworks has a ton of people who do incredible research. And so I think we're getting a lot closer to making these things more accessible and making it easier for people who, you know, might skew more towards the like, I don't give a fuck. But are now able to like verify what types of contracts they're using and what the interactions between those contracts are. I think especially as we move into this consumer phase, what's going to be super important is not necessarily like auditing contracts on Etherscan, but being able to verify that like you aren't going to get totally screwed by contracts either. And so I think this type of tooling is going to be super important in the context of saying, okay, how can we teach users again, trust but verify, to push this sort of like on-chain mechanic that frankly we haven't seen before. Like it hasn't been possible for you to check the chain when you're paying someone with PayPal. So I think building more of this type of tooling is going to be super important.
Before I do rapid fire, I just want to ask one question that I saw, or ask your take on a tweet that I saw from you that I thought was interesting. You said on July 19th, you cannot L2 your way to PMF. What does this mean? Can you expand?
Yeah, this was I had some people who were like, this is a terrible take, and some people who were like, this is a great take. And by the way, I wasn't subtweeting anyone in particular. I think that the thing there for me is just that I think that what we've seen is a lot of times applications or projects that have struggled to get traction have kind of fallen back on the idea of being like, well, gas fees are just expensive and it's really hard to onboard people, which is true. Again, to the point about a death by 1,000 cuts and being able to experiment with this stuff, like I do think that makes a big impact. I would really love for people to avoid immediately defaulting to going a layer deeper in infrastructure because they couldn't find consumer traction. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at there, which is like there is an appeal to being like, well, this didn't work. Let's just launch an L2. And there's value in that. I think having a ton of L2s is going to be great. I'm excited about that. But I just think it's a very easy thing to fall back on rather than looking more critically at why whatever it is that you were doing did not work. And then I also just think that like everyone's going to be launching L2s and everyone's going to be competing for that basically demand for block space. And I don't think that is necessarily the perfect solution to getting to PMF. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to unpack in that.
ICOing is the proper solution
of course.
to PMF.
If you can't
Launch
get to
tokens,
PMF,
not
just
chain.
let people speculate on you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you said that, it reminded me of like a life coach that essentially like you couldn't figure out what you wanted to do in life. So instead you go down a layer and you become the life coach, then tell other people what to do.
1,000%. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but it's like, we still need people who are actually doing things that are not, building infrastructure. So yeah, I want to be wary of that. And I'm to be clear, I'm super excited about, the potential for app chains and app specific rollups. And I think there's a lot of excitement, at least in my head, in terms of what that means for consumers. I just want to be wary of people or projects who have not reached any degree of like consumer PMF being like, well, we're just going to do the infrastructure instead, because it just we end up in the same thing that we've gotten to already, which is just like the incentives make a ton of sense to do that. And it also means that we don't actually make any real meaningful progress towards mainstream adoption.
Yeah, in 2021 you were a DAO, in 2022 you're an NFT, in 2023 you're a chain, right? And you're just like, yeah, joke
Evolution.
DAO, joke NFTs, joke chain. We're just gonna like, yeah, keep pivoting with the times and trying to the zeitgeist.
Yes. Like if you don't anticipate sufficient demand for your roll up because your app is really killing it, perhaps consider whether or not you should be launching a roll up for your app. You know, that's kind of I think the dynamic there.
It's well put. Mert, do you want to go into the rapid fire?
Sure. Okay. I'm gonna keep this short. Just gonna ask some rapid fire questions. Try to keep it, brief, lizard brain. But if you want to expand, go ahead, of course. And we'll just go with David and then Chase in order every time. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Wow, I have to do it first. Great.
Get nervous.
It's just round robin.
I already
okay.
am. Don't worry. Yes.
Your 3 favorite crypto apps?
None. I don't have any favorite crypto apps. There's what? Yeah, Jokerace, Jokerace, joke and race. There we go.
Nice.
Chase.
Damn. I like Twitter, which is not a crypto app, but I think that's one. I actually love using DeFi, like Aave. I know that's so boring because it's basically like saying a savings account,
Aave's
but
pretty
there
great.
is something exciting about being able to earn ETH on top of my ETH. Like that just feels good, and it feels like a real use case that actually makes sense. So I'm not going to give you 3, but I'll give you 2. Yeah, Uniswap is also awesome. Yeah, feels good to use.
Uniswap's a beautiful app. Yeah.
How would you explain what a DAO is to your parents?
It's when you give up all of your money and decision making to a bunch of random people who are buying a thing called your token that you actually don't get any money for either, because it's all secondaries. How's that?
Incredible. You're a great salesman, David.
yeah. Everyone want to join a DAO now?
Mine is just user controlled, user owned internet, user owned digital spaces. You
You're
actually
going
have
the positive one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
nice,
going with
nice.
the cope.
I like that.
We're going full cope.
What's a community that you wish existed in crypto?
Yeah, okay. Quick rant. We're talking a lot about, these like network states. And it's like the thing they have in common is it's like we're talking about digital sovereignty, but in practice, it's a bunch of rich people going to land. It's like that's not where the opportunity is for crypto. The opportunity for crypto, we know this is the unbanked. It's all the people around the world who don't have access to an international finance system. And we've finally created an international finance system that can be inclusive and include everyone around the world with internet. And the idea that you now want to split that off and just take over a small piece of land with a bunch of rich people, like this is what I think the bull case is for Solana. It's like Solana is the international chain, right? The one that doesn't know boundaries and can include everyone. I would like to see communities of unbanked people who are actually able to pool resources together to support each other. I think Gia is like a really great project working on this. But yeah, like I'm much more interested in the opportunity, both in terms of the chain, but also in terms of the people who don't have access to this than the people who have the most access and them getting to use it just for their own sake as well. There we go. Chase.
Big +1. Can't follow that up. So I'll +1 it.
All right.
Which is the laziest answer. Sorry.
No, it's a great answer. What is your most unpopular take in crypto?
Mine is probably this addictive thing, which I'll say there's a lot of nuance to it. I don't think we should make everything addictive. I definitely don't think we should financialize the shit out of everything we're doing. But right now, I do think that we need to be making more trade-offs than we've been willing to make in the past to actually experiment and understand what works.
Mine is probably that buying tokens was a distraction from the actual use cases of blockchains.
Ooh, that is a hot take. Nice. What is one thing that you wish everybody listening to this would take away from governance? What do you want to drill into people's heads about governance?
It needs to be hornier. Chase.
Yes.
It needs to be hornier. All right.
It needs to be hornier. It needs to be the feature, not the product, I think. And yeah, I mean, horniness as a feature as a mechanic for governance is, and that's how we get to PMF basically.
All right. Last question.
Don't get Mert excited.
You have to, if you clip that, by the way, you
Governance.
have to clip it with David saying that first. You cannot just clip me.
Yes.
You'll be first. Don't worry. It'll only
Just
be
to
you.
make sure.
I've got a question, even though it's not like a formulated question yet. Y'all are both like super fun and get along together really well. And it seems like, one, you're extremely smart and insightful, but you don't take yourself too seriously. Like, what? One, how do you do that? How do you talk about being horny and dicks all the time? But like, you know, how are you comfortable?
All the time. Literally all the time.
How are you comfortable doing that? Or like, how do you maintain that? I feel like most people in the space take themselves way too seriously. So I'm just curious, either your philosophy about that, or I don't know, some insight.
I mean,
Why
why
are
we
you
here?
so horny on Maine?
Yeah.
Basically the question.
Do you guys
Like,
have a problem?
How did you make it where you can
Do you guys
like
need
speak?
therapy? Yeah.
I think other people like wouldn't feel comfortable doing it. So do you think you just like started being authentic one day and like owned it, and then everybody just accepts it? Because I think some people would be like, if I say this, like I'm gonna be like canceled off Twitter.
I think it's just like we haven't gotten canceled yet, and so we just keep going, and then like, you know, at some point we'll get canceled. But you know, yeah, I honestly like for the first 6 months I was in Twitter, I never told a joke. I like wanted to be taken seriously, and it was getting like very little traction. And my friends are like, why do you have like this stick up your ass on Twitter? You know, like why can't you be you? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I realized like being likable is actually one of the most important things you can do in social media. Like being likable is like, that's a reason people want to work with you, you know, both in terms of hiring, but also just in terms of BD and things. And so like, if I can have fun and that actually is a winning business strategy, like that is what is unique about crypto as a sphere. Like that historically has not been true. You did not historically get to both have fun and have that be a good business opportunity. But crypto is really, really special in that way. And that's why, despite all the issues of this industry, I fucking love it.
Yeah.
I also think like crypto is very much like a not serious industry in the sense that like, again, we haven't achieved product market fit in most of the things that we're doing. So the whole like taking yourself super seriously thing, I think I'm just not particularly sold on. David, I think, is way funnier on the internet than I am. I think David is way funnier, period, than I am. But I do think that there's like an element of just like, if you take yourself super, super seriously, you're holding yourself back. I feel that way in general about posting on the internet, by the way. Like if you have this high bar for how you want to be perceived, you're never going to create anything and you're never going to share anything because you're always going to hold yourself to something that's just like unattainable on a long enough time scale. So I think that doing whatever the fuck you want and being, you know, at least somewhat authentically you is just much more interesting. And really the risk in crypto of that is so low. Like this isn't JP Morgan, you know, we're not.
Yeah. And when you remember it's all theater, you're just A/B testing your personality, like with every tweet.
Which
you
is
know?
scary.
It's like 280 characters to see, you know, what people like. And it's like, most people do not like most of my tweets for good reason. They're not good. But, you know, it's like I get to A/B test and like find out what parts of my personality actually are effective. It's great. I get data on myself all the time.
We've talked a lot about David, but like there's also a scary version where you let, you know, your engagement drive your personality, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Like audience capture type
Completely.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
Well, you guys are just super anti-mimetic in that way, and I think like people are attracted to that. And on the embarrassing bit, I actually think it's interesting too because you have a competitive advantage. Like, oh, people find this embarrassing. This is perfect for me to do because no one else will do it.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
cringe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like even being a podcaster in crypto to me is like, and then it's like, oh wait, most people won't do that. So I love it. I love those answers.
The product market fit in crypto is being cringe, you know, like Doge, cum rockets, like bald coin, whatever it
crypto
is.
dick butts.
It's like cringe wins. Yeah.
Murder, are you gonna follow that up with anything? Or do you want to close?
No, that was
also, guys, I am gonna miss my flight if I do not run.
Okay, we gotta go.
Yeah.
Chase, David, thank you so much for coming. See you next time.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, guys. This is
everybody.
awesome.